Horror is full of surprise hits, and that's why we love it. One day we sit down to a new entry in a classic slasher franchise, and then we're tuning into a killer girl doll singing Kate Bush. But they can't all be pleasant surprises, and sometimes a movie is absolutely destined to just disappoint. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from What Culture Horror, and today we're covering upcoming horror movies that are already doomed. First up, Pinocchio Unstrung. Nobody asked for the twisted child universe, but by God, if we aren't getting it again and again and again. After failing to pay out the grisly promise of recently untethered characters like Winnie the Pooh and Peter Pan, Reese Frake Waterfield and Jagged Edge Productions continue apace, determined to horrorify all of our favourite childhood characters. And the next installment in this rushed series of messy and disappointing horrors is Pinocchio Unstrung. This film promises a Pinocchio who, robbed of his innocence, sets out not to become a real boy, but to right the wrongs of a sick and nasty world. His crusade will be in the name of all things good, and his methods will be bloody. But the question is anyone still watching? The hype was pretty major for Blood and Honey, but after the filmmakers failed to deliver on that and its hurried sequel, that initial excitement was lost. No doubt the pace of these things is designed to get them out while there's still some semblance of interest and before word has fully gotten out about the film's questionable quality. Next, we're talking about Scream 7. Scream all you want, but this seventh entry in the iconic meta-horror franchise is shaping up to be a little bit of a nightmare. Following the release of the sixth film, directors Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett left the next installment first. Then, star of the legacy sequels Melissa Barrera was given the boot, then director Christopher Landon quit, then co-lead Jenna Ortega departed the project, then the script was overhauled and a new story was conceptualized, and original writer Kevin Williamson was hired as the new director. Naturally, this travesty of a production called time on the planned initial trilogy and the passing of the torch to the next generation of stars. And as a result, producers were forced to come crawling back to Neve Campbell, the old series lead Sidney Prescott, who was left out of Scream 6 because the studio wasn't willing to pay her what she was worth. But even this has failed to lend the production the credibility it requires, instead stinking of desperation rather than any coherent plan. Indeed, it looks like they're throwing everything at the wall to garner some goodwill. With the rumored return of original Ghostface Stu, the series' least popular villain Roman Bridger, and slain hero Dewey Riley, all rumored to return. How the film is going to manage this, we don't know, but the panicked production, not to mention Williamson's own lack of quality as a director, means that it'll probably take a miracle. Next up, we're talking about The Exorcist Believer 2. When Blumhouse announced that The Exorcist was returning to the big screen with not just one film, but a whole new trilogy of movies directed by David Gordon Green, the writing was kind of on the wall. Hell, it was probably on one of our lists with the same title as this one. Such was it nailed on that the first flick, The Exorcist Believer, would inevitably be a dud. And a dud it was, so much so that the studio immediately put the brakes on the follow-up movies. Gordon Green ended up leaving the project, and Mike Flanagan was hired to steady the ship for the next film. And on paper, that should have been a good move. Everybody loves Mike Flanagan. He's one of the most reliable names in horror working today. But it might just be time to accept that no matter who's in charge, this franchise aptly is just a little bit cursed. At this point, it's clear that the studio is a major hurdle to making a good Exorcist movie. They famously have been at odds with filmmakers for decades now, leading to compromised sequels that have been recut to death in the editing room, and this didn't seem to change even when the rights jumped to Blumhouse for this movie, with them having no plan for the franchise other than gimme more Exorcist films. Flanagan has also confirmed that his take will not hit its 2026 release date, with production not starting until he finishes up work on Carrie. And listen, none of this brings me joy. The Exorcist is one of my favorite films ever. Hell, I saw Believer in theaters in IMAX. I want this sequel to be good, but everything is just pointing towards another miss. Next, we're talking about Blade. Blade, oh Blade, where art thou, Blade? Marvel head honcho Kevin Feige first talked of introducing the character into the MCU in 2016, before a film was officially announced in 2019, with Mahershala Ali in the title role. Director Bassem Tariq wasn't on board until September of 2021, after the film's production had already been pushed back to 2022, and Feige's 2022 announcement that we would see the film in November of 23 proved ambitious at best. Blade has suffered greatly from endless delays, losing several successive directors, writers, and co-stars, even fumbling the great Delroy Lindo, and several times has been rumored to have been cancelled outright altogether. Feige, however, has recently confirmed it is currently in development, having whittled the story down from 4 versions to just 1. Unfortunately, when it does arrive, Blade will be stepping into a flagging MCU, and one not built to accommodate adult-oriented films or horror. Despite being given the go-ahead for an R rating, which is great, it has seemed for a very long time that no matter what they do, they're just not going to be able to do Blade justice. Next, a Weapons prequel. Weapons has been 2025's standout horror hit, proving that director Zach Cregger's Barbarian wasn't just a one-off, and pulling in over $250 million at the box office worldwide. Despite being a self-contained story with little in the way of sequel baiting, however, that kind of money speaks, and as a result, there is already talk that New Line Cinema is looking to create further movies in this universe. And one idea that's been floated around by the executives is a prequel movie based on Weapons' now dead antagonist, Aunt Gladys. As established in the movie, Aunt Gladys comes to town and kidnaps a class full of kids and uses her witchy powers to steal their life force and regain her own youth and health. Mystery is kind of at the heart of the character, and the film leaving so much to the imagination. You know, where did she come from? What are these powers? What else has she been up to? Makes her such an effective villain. The decision to dive into her backstory with a prequel then not only could miss the point of what made Weapons so scary, but actively rob that film of some of its mystique. It's not that prequels can't be great, they absolutely can, just in this case, less is definitely more. And if the initial sentiment online is anything to go by, few fans of Weapons are clamoring to peel the full curtain back on Aunt Gladys. Next, one that hurts me personally, Saw 11. Look, I get no joy out of being skeptical about some of the movies on this list. I absolutely loved Saw X, a movie that put the focus back on Tobin Bell's John Kramer and gave us one of the most unique stories in the series. So, when it was announced that Saw 11 was in development and would pick up right where X left off, I was over the moon. Sadly, though, we will never get that movie. After months of speculation that something was wrong internally with the franchise, it was announced that the original producers had abandoned the plans to make a follow-up and were instead selling the rights to the whole IP to Blumhouse. With this, the original script was thrown out in favor of the studio building a new movie from the ground up. Now, I like Blumhouse as much as the next guy, but it's hard to deny that they've been in something of a creative rut recently. They've had some hits for sure, but when it comes to treating iconic franchises well, their track record isn't great. Hell, we've already talked about their handling of The Exorcist, and Halloween didn't fare much better either. Original director James Wan being back on board to consult is one pro to take from all of this, but with Jason Blum talking about not ruling out mad ideas like a crossover with the Megan franchise, and reportedly being more interested in having Saw to expand it into other media rather than to focus on making new movies, who knows what we're going to get from the next installment. Next up is Five Nights at Freddy's 2. 2023's Five Nights at Freddy's struck long after the iron was cold, the better part of a decade on from the original flurry of games, and 2 years after Kevin Lewis and Nick Cage had already put out what is surely the definitive unofficial Five Nights film, Willy's Wonderland. Despite Five Nights at Freddy's generally getting slaughtered by critics, Blumhouse are bringing the haunted house style film back for a sequel because it made a lot of money. But a further 2 years on and the premise is not really getting any fresher. After bringing the house down on Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and leaving its cursed animatronics behind, the surviving cast of the first film return and are once again drawn back into the horrors. But what's left. Matthew Lillard's William Afton is the bad guy in full yellow bunny guise, but beyond him taking another crack at Mike and his sister Abby, the film has all but ran out of narrative track. Sure, jump scares aren't the bane of horror they're so often made out to be, but if this is all the film is gonna be, we might as well just play the games. Next, Return to Silent Hill. Return to Silent Hill has been a long time in the making. Fans have hoped for a proper sequel to the underrated 2006 movie for decades at this point, and finally, in January, we're going to be able to sit down and watch it. Even better, the flick is adapting the Silent Hill 2 game, following James Sunderland, who goes to the titular town in search of his dead wife, but finds himself faced with horrors. Director Christoph Gans is back behind the camera as well, so what exactly is the problem here? Well, the real warning comes from the numerous production delays that the film has suffered, and the open conflict between Gans and producers. And rarely does a film where the creative team are warring turn out all that well. The flick finished shooting at the start of 2024, but it has sat in post-production limbo since, with Gans speaking to a French publication in early 2025 and explaining that the delay was down to issues with the executive producers. The unnamed problem even delayed the finishing of the film by a whole year. Thankfully, the flick is finally locked in for release, and we even have a trailer, and it's definitely a trailer, all right. Look, of course, it's going to be different from the finished film, but it just didn't too much to sell us on the look and characterization of James in particular, and the action focus arguably missed the point of the original Silent Hill 2. With this in mind and the production worries, it won't be surprising if it doesn't quite live up to the years of hype.